Hello and a warm welcome to Tata Literature Live, the Mumbai International Lit Fest, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects and powered by Godrej. This session is presented by KV Mariwala Philanthropy Initiative. There will be a short Q&A at the end of the session, so please do send in your questions in the comments section of the platform that you are viewing from. Khalil Gibran has said, and I quote, "Out of suffering have emerged the strongest souls. The most massive characters are seared with scars. But what is it that gives hope when all seems lost? How does one withstand the worst misfortune and still emerge with one's sanity intact?" Our panel today weighs in. Make him laugh, make him cry, make him think. That's the mantra award-winning screenwriter and author Graeme Simsion lives by. A beautiful reflection of the human condition. His novels, The Rosie Project, along with its two sequels, The Rosie Effect and The Rosie Result, have sold around 5 million copies in 40 languages. If not for a cup of coffee, one of the most compelling personal stories of hope, resilience, and survival, Heather Morris's The Tattooist of Auschwitz, might never have been written. The book is based on the story of Holocaust survivor Lale Sokolov, with whom she had a chance encounter while working in a Melbourne hospital. The New York Times bestseller and her follow-up novels Silka's Journey and Three Sisters have sold 8 million copies worldwide. Chairing the conversation is Nandita Bose, an author whose writing focuses on human relationships and hidden emotional lives of ordinary people. Her books include Tread Softly, If Walls Could Weep, The Perfume of Promise, Shadow and Soul, and Everglow. A lot of her work has modern and classical music influences, including songs by Coldplay. And now, capturing grace and beauty in stories of courage, we bring you Hope Floats. A warm welcome to our panelists.
Welcome to our session, Hope Floats. I would beg permission for a little bit of fangirling because I'm in the presence of true blue superstars. And I hope we have amazing takeaways from this session. To begin, I'll ask my first question directed to Heather. In stories of hope, you say, all I can offer are lessons learned from my own personal good fortune in finding others prepared to tell their stories. Could you outline some of these lessons and how they epitomize hope?
Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. It's a delight to be speaking to you all at this festival. Yeah, the first lesson I received started as a young girl and was given to me by my great-grandfather. He was a man who lived 2 paddocks away from where I grew up, and I got to stop and see him every afternoon on my way home from school. I would sit with him, and he taught me about the importance of listening, that only when we listen do we actually hear. I'm talking actively listen. You meet a friend and you ask them, how are you? 9 times out of 10, all you're wanting to hear is, I'm fine, and move on from that. There often will come times when somebody will respond in such a way that if you listen and look, you'll hear that they may not be fine. And this could be your opportunity to do something, to offer some kind of hope and help. I preface that by saying that when somebody does start talking to you about a situation, it could be large, it could be small. The last thing they want to hear is you saying, oh, that happened to me. Oh, I know that's somebody who that happened to. I don't think we give credit enough to the fact that people, well, us, all of us, what we would like to do just occasionally is have somebody listen to us without coming back. So for me, the number one lesson has always been learnt as a young girl. Listen, not only to yourself, to those around you, to everything around you, not only people, animals, your environment. There's a huge community that we all live in, but we don't always see it and we don't listen enough to it. So it just really, for me, you will find hope in talking to people, but more importantly, listening to them.
Thank you, Heather. That was beautiful. I'll turn to you now, Graeme. You've given up a beautiful alternative career to turn a writer. How was that journey? And do you, like me, believe that writing is the ultimate act of hope?
Well, let me say that screenwriting is certainly the ultimate act of hope, because your chances of getting an original screenplay produced are just so tiny. But it's a little more complicated than that. I mean, the history is that I was working in information technology, and I wouldn't call it a beautiful career, but I was fairly happy with it, when I stumbled upon a book, one of those books that changes your life. It was called The Unkindest Cut by American film critic Joe Queenan, and it describes his attempts, more or less successful, to make a very low budget movie, writing the script himself, casting friends, and so forth. And I was absolutely captivated by this story and thought, I have to do this myself. With my wife, who did comment that Joe Queenan almost lost his marriage over this, but we decided to take that risk. And to cut a long story short, over 9 months, we made a truly terrible movie, which we showed to all our friends who'd been cast in it and so forth. But I caught the screenwriting bug. I thought, I can do this. I'd always had somewhere in my heart I wanted to be a novelist, but didn't think I could do it. But I thought, I can do screenwriting. And so I quit my job. I enrolled in a course in screenwriting, spent 5 years working on a project, and at the end realized finally that nobody wants to make, or it's very rare for people to want to make original screenplays. What they want to do, what the big studios want to do, think of the last movie you saw. What a very big chance it was an adaptation of a best-selling novel. Certainly in Hollywood, that's what they want to do. So I realized that what I needed to do was to rewrite my screenplay as a novel in the hope that it would be adapted. So coming around the big circle, which I did, and at the end of it, Sony Pictures has indeed optioned the screenplay, but somewhere in between there, I became a novelist. So that's my story. In terms of being an ultimate act of hope, I don't think hope's the word to describe what I took into this change of life. I was relishing doing something different. I was excited from day one of my course. I enjoyed every little victory, or whatever you want to call it, every time I got to write something that I was proud of, every time I had a short story published or whatever. This was enormously satisfying to me. So I'd have characterized it as you're genuinely moving to doing something that the time was right for me to do at that point in my life.
That sounds really brave, and I'm so happy to hear that we'd be seeing a movie version soon, hopefully.
Hopefully is the word. You've used the right word.
Heather, over to you again. And this is about your latest book, Three Sisters, which too is based on a true story. And I've read this wonderful account of how you've gone across and met the two surviving sisters in Israel. And, it's absolutely fascinating. So could you tell us more about the journey and perhaps treat us to a sneak peek into your new book?
Thank you. I'm so honoured to have been able to tell this incredible story of Livy, Magda, and Sibby. I was on a book tour in South Africa 2 years ago, just over 2 years ago. We were in the wine region just outside of Cape Town, a place called Franschhoek. If anybody who's into wine, I can thoroughly recommend it. I got back to my hotel room one night, quite late, and I decided to look at some emails. I opened an email and read it from a man who lives in Toronto in Canada. I have to explain that the Tattooist of Auschwitz, while in some 55, 56 countries, only 2 other countries took the same cover as the Australian cover. Not even the Indian cover, it's different. It is just a black background with 2 arms from the elbow down coming together and the tattooed numbers of Lali and Gita. That is significant. This man, he lives in Toronto in Canada, and he picked up the Canadian copy of the Tattooist, same cover as Australia. Only Brazil took it as well. He flew to Tel Aviv to visit his mother and left it on her coffee table a couple of days later. She walked past and looked at the cover and said to him, "That must be about Lali and Gita." And then he said, how could you possibly know that? And she said, look at the number on the arm of the girl on the cover. Now look at the number on my arm. They're 3 apart. Your Auntie Sibby's was only 2 apart. We went to school with Gita. We were on the train going to Auschwitz with Gita. We were in block 21 with Gita. You don't remember her. She came and visited us in Israel 2 or 3 times. No matter what the time is and no matter how much wine you've drunk, when you read that, there's no more sleeping. Over the next 48 hours, several emails flowed, and finally I was asked would I ring and speak to this 93-year-old Livy. And I did. And she started talking to me about Lali and Gita. And then she said, oh, look, I don't like talking on the telephone. You've got to come and see me. Sure. Okay. I'm sure I can drop everything. Well, I spoke to my publishers in London, and within 48 hours, instead of returning home to Melbourne, I flew from Johannesburg to Tel Aviv and into the apartment and into the arms of Livy and Magda and their families. And after a week of being with them, they asked me, would I tell their story? I told them to get a ghostwriter. Somebody needed to tell this incredible story I was hearing. But they sent me away one day. Go to Jerusalem, they said. No, I said, I can't go there. Why not? It's too far away. Well, they kind of looked at me weird, as if to say, what are you talking about? It's 40 minutes down the road. So on that day that I went to Jerusalem, 4 generations, yes, they brought the tiny great-grandchildren as well, got together. And on my return, they all approached me and said, would you please tell the story? And I have.
And I'm dying to read this, and I'm sure everybody tuning in would want to read this as well.
Thank you.
So my question to Graeme was, are you as funny in real life as you are in the books? But I don't need to ask that because he's just treated us to his cricket commentator versions, you know. So he is truly a funny man. And I don't know whether you know this, but Indians are crazy about P.G. Wodehouse. And we have not found, you know, somebody to follow up his act. And I think you're getting there. You are going to be an idol in India soon as a comic writer, as a humor writer who's writing about things of substance. Was the Rosie result an inevitable follow-up act to your 2 previous Rosie titles?
Oh, let me say thank you very much for the very kind words about being funny. But let me say my answer is I'm much funnier in real life than I am on paper, and almost everybody is. It's incredibly hard to be much harder to make people laugh. You can be amusing when you write, but we're used to laughing at performance. We're used to laughing at the stand-up comedian, at the television or film comedy, at performance, and performance is a big part of what makes us really laugh out loud, and so is the community. You laugh with a group very often. It's much harder in a solo situation, in that relationship with the book where the timing isn't there. So I find getting people to laugh out loud from writing is so much harder than achieving the same thing in a personal sort of interaction. But no, look, there was the Rosie Effect and the Rosie Result, the 2 sequels to the Rosie Project, were not planned at the time. In fact, traditionally, there are no sequels to romantic comedies. That was always the rule, that the couple live happily ever after, or occasionally don't, and that's the end. We don't want to see the marriage and all of those sorts of things. We want to be left with the nice warm feeling that things will be happy ever after, because in real life we know that that doesn't actually happen. I mean, Bridget Jones's Diary is perhaps one of the few exceptions out there, but really what Helen Fielding did with that book was she got to the end and said, okay, they didn't really get together. It was just a good high moment. Now there's another bump in the road and we'll continue the romantic comedy. I didn't want to do that, but I wanted to explore some. I got feedback that said, in effect, this couple will not just not be happily ever after, they won't make a successful marriage because Don, by the way, who is autistic, Don is too weird. And I thought to myself, God, I know plenty of people who are weirder than Don and couples who are less compatible than Don and Rosie who've made very successful marriages. So the motivation to write The Rosie Effect was to show people that you could have a successful marriage with its ups and downs. And really, to me, it's a more important question than what makes us fall in love is what makes us stay together. We spend 12 months falling in love and 30, 40, 50 years living together and trying to make that all work. So to me, it's a far more important area to explore. And then that was going to be the second and conclusion to the series. And then for all sorts of other reasons, primarily to explore what autism meant to a child, I did the Rosie result. But in writing those books, there was never the idea in my mind that there would be another one.
Wow. Wow. But I'm so happy because these three seem so naturally, they're each a natural progression of the previous one. And we cannot give up on Don Tillman, so we need to know more about him. Yeah. And I will now move to a more serious topic with Heather. Could you take us through your meetings with Lale, with Livia, and with Magda? How was it all?
Yeah, with Lale, it was so outside anything I had ever met in terms of a person with a history. The first day I met him, well, he hardly could speak. He was so grief-stricken. He wanted to tell his story. I was there because I had a cup of coffee with a friend. And that friend just casually said to me, I have a friend whose mother has just died. His father has asked him to find someone he can tell a story to. That person can't be Jewish. You're not Jewish. Would you like to meet him? My friend was Jewish. When I asked what the story was, she said she didn't know. And I just naturally said, well, it doesn't matter. I'd love to meet him. Because as I mentioned earlier, I had learned from my great-grandfather that if you want to learn about anything in life, you're going to learn it from people. So I agreed to meet Lale Sokolov, and a week later I did. He rambled. He could not tell a coherent story if he tried. He kept telling me he didn't really want to be with me. He wanted to be with Gita. So for many weeks, in fact months, what I was getting from Lale was this clinical, very unemotional storyline, but it was starting to play out. And one day it just occurred to me, oh my goodness, I'm spending time with living history. My small town New Zealand education had taught me very little about the Holocaust. Don't know about yours, Graeme, but it did not feature in my education. So to be sitting with this person who is such a significant person in Holocaust history, the person responsible for making those iconic numbers on the arms of boys and girls, men and women. And it was just through getting him to know me more than me getting to know him. It kind of helped that he got very attached to my then 18-year-old daughter and became quite smitten by her. I worked out it was probably because she was the same age that Gita was when he met her. So as he got to know me and my family shared with him all my foibles and all my bad cooking, he then realized that I was just an ordinary person too. And that's when, together with my getting on with his two dogs, anybody that's interacting with somebody wanting to get them to talk about their life and they've got pets, get on with the pets. That he then started telling me his story in now an emotional sense and not hiding things from me, not just touching on subjects. So my time with Lale extended for 3 years. I was with him up until 2 hours before he died. And the very last thing I said to him as I kissed him goodbye, knowing that he would not see the sun come up the next day, was that I would never, ever stop trying to tell his story. It took me a while because, like Graeme, I wrote his story as a screenplay. And that's how it existed for some 12 years until I saw the light of day by being smacked around the head by my sister-in-law in San Diego in the US, who just tired of me complaining about Hollywood. You know what I'm talking about, Graeme? Just leant over the table one night and said, oh, for goodness sake, write the thing as a book and get on with it. That's how the novel came about. My time with the sisters, Livy and Magda, it's been a lot more concentrated. I've had two periods when I've been able to meet them and be in Israel with them and their families. And now it's all done with Zoom and WhatsApp video. But 95-year-olds are a bit of a hoot when they've got a WhatsApp video phone and they're trying to talk to you, and you keep seeing just the inside of their ear as they forget it's a video thing. But together with their families, and this has been the crucial thing for me, every single adult member of that family, of which there are 3 generations, have been involved in my telling this story. The Three Sisters book would not have gone to the printers unless every adult member of those 3 girls' families approved what I had written, how I had written. So yeah, for me, it's been about a big family affair here. I am now part of that family. Livy wants to adopt me. I keep saying no. She's got her own daughter and son, so that should do her. And when one of her granddaughters was married just last month in Israel, I arranged with the cinematographer with their permission to be there and film the wedding, live streaming it back to me in Australia, because they wanted me to be part of it. And the authorities wouldn't let me out of Australia and the authorities in Israel wouldn't let me in. But yes, it's a different process. I am still very much a part of all of their lives and will remain that way. I will be in Israel in January. The borders are opening and it's my first stop.
Wow. When you brought up the fact that you are not Jewish and you've written the story about Jewish people, and Dawn, who is Graeme's principal character, is autistic, whereas Graeme clearly is not. Have you faced any criticism, any positive feedback about the fact that you were writing about people not like you?
Well, it's interesting that you say that I'm clearly not, because many people assume I am autistic, which sort of immediately gets me off the hook. But I don't identify as autistic. And when I started writing the Rosie Project, frankly, that wasn't seen as much of an issue. But the question of appropriation, of who gets to tell the stories, has become far more visible in the last few years.
Sure.
And the autistic community is very strongly, it's far more activist than it used to be. I think social media has encouraged that, as has the merging of the term Asperger's with autism. So 2 groups have come together and embraced that and being very supportive. So you now have a very strong activist group that wants to see own voices. They want these stories told by autistic people. But it's not as simple as that, because just getting a book published by an autistic person doesn't mean the story will be well told. It doesn't mean that the peripheral characters will be well handled. It doesn't mean it will be a bestseller or critically acclaimed. Conversely, the Rosie Project's been very successful, and the autistic community have been massively, overwhelmingly supportive of it. And I think for 2 reasons. One is, if you like, the cynical reason that it's getting out there and it's a positive view of autism. If it's going to sell that number of copies, well, fantastic. Let's not get too fussed about who wrote it. I think the other aspect is it's a very positive view of autism, and it did not come out of textbooks, because now, Heather can trump me on number of books sold. She can trump me on the profoundness to the world of the area that she's been working in. But what she can't beat me on is immersion, because the guy who inspired the Don Tillman character, I have known as a close friend for 44 years. And so I have lived his life with him. I've seen his successes and failures and so on. The story, and it was he and his story that inspired the Rosie Project. As it turned out, after many rewrites and learning about the writing craft, it's moved so far that he does not recognize himself or any incidents on the page. It's moved a long way, but that initial input came from him. And because I think my characters were based on deep understanding and friendships. I've worked in information technology. And people say, what research did you do on autism? I say, 30 years in information technology. I met lots of autistic people, most of whom were not out or identified as autistic, but they certainly were. And I think because it came from that, as Heather said, you go out and meet people. You don't read books. You go out and meet people. And if you do that, then your representation is very likely to be authentic.
Sorry to be a timekeeper here, but I do want you both to get your readings through at this point.
Alrighty, well, look, I'll start, but I'm just going to quickly say, to answer to your previous question, for me, the support has been overwhelmingly supportive, without question. I've spoken in synagogues all around the world, from London to South Africa to throughout Europe and the US, Jewish communities, tiny ones in Krakow and Poland, larger ones in Toronto and all around. So yeah, and when I meet other survivors, I hear from them, thank you for telling Lali and Gita's story. And telling their story, you've told mine. Mm. So yes, for me, no, it's yeah, I can't speak highly enough of this Jewish community who have embraced me, and I now know a lot more about them. Now, my reading is from Three Sisters. It's at a period when they are no longer in the Auschwitz-Birkenau. They've actually moved to Israel. Livy, the youngest, she was 15 when she was into Israel, into Auschwitz. She is now working as a maid in the house of the first president of the nation state of Israel, Chaim Weizmann. And she's just started working there. Mrs. Weizmann greets Livy with a big smile. My husband returned home last night, and as he hasn't had a chance to meet you, I wondered if you'd like to come along to his office and say hello. Say hello to President Weizmann? Livy asks, with a tiny tremble in her voice. But Mrs. Weizmann is striding ahead. She knocks on the president's door and opens it without waiting for an invitation. Chaim, this is Livy, the new maid who is keeping us all on our toes. Hello, Livy. The president rises from behind his desk. He has a goatee beard and round glasses. He looks like a university professor. I've heard a lot about you. His eyes are friendly, and Livy finds herself warming to this man. He holds out his hand, and Livy takes it. As is her instinct, she slides her left arm behind her back, a gesture the president is quick to catch. He reaches for her arm, and very gently he pushes up her sleeve. Tenderly, he traces his fingers over the tattooed numbers. There's quite a journey in these numbers, isn't there? He says softly. Livy nods. I hope one day you will tell me about it. She did. She went on to become a very good friend, the simple maid, with the first president of Israel. When she was married, he had died 6 months earlier, but the first lady of Israel, Vera Weizmann, came to her wedding. And in the back of the book, there is a photo of the bride and the groom and the first lady of Israel.
Beautiful. Graeme, could you read a little excerpt too before we proceed?
Impossible to follow, but I shall do my best. Okay. Don Tillman would insist that I started from the beginning of the book because obviously that's the correct place to start, so there. I was standing on one leg, shucking oysters when the problems began. If I had not been a scientist, conscious of the human propensity to see patterns where they did not exist, I might have concluded that I was being punished by some deity for the sin of pride. Earlier that afternoon, I had been completing a performance review form and was presented with the question, what do you consider to be your key strength? It was a vague construction which specified neither context nor level of generalization. Expertise in genetics was the obvious answer, but this was implied by the job title, Professor of Genetics. My knowledge of myxoid liposarcoma would soon be of minimal relevance, as my research project in this area was nearing completion. Objectivity and intelligence might suggest that I thought some academics lacked these attributes, which was true, but probably tactless. I needed to avoid tactlessness. I was still searching for an answer when Rosie arrived home. What are you doing in your pajamas? She asked. Preparing dinner, which I'm time-sharing with solving a problem, and single-leg dips. I meant, why are you wearing pajamas? There was a minor cooking accident involving an exploding chestnut. I was attempting to speed up the process by increasing the temperature, hence the oil on various surfaces. I indicated the splashes on the ceiling. My clothes were also affected. I avoided further loss of time by switching directly to pajamas rather than putting on an intermediate costume. I think you get the idea.
Brilliant, brilliant. Could I also ask you about the character of the young boy who is Dr. Tillman's son, Hudson? And what did you really want to portray through this character?
Okay, I wanted to, people wanted a story, I'll keep it quick. People wanted a story about Don's childhood. But unfortunately, given Don's age, that would have been set in the 1970s when attitudes to autism were quite different. But it's really important, I think, to explore autism in children because they often face the biggest challenges, partly because they haven't learnt to play the game of society, and partly because schools are such awful places potentially for them as institutions. So I fell upon the idea of writing about Don's son, who would also be autistic. Autism does run in families, so it's a realistic sort of prospect.
Sure.
And that would take us into the present day. And of course, in trying to help his son, Don would get to reflect on his own childhood. So we could build that in anyway. So it was a nice combination. It was a nice premise for how to write the book. But look, at the end of the day, I wanted to raise awareness of autism in children and of the challenges, the problems that they faced. And I don't come at these books with with this big message I want to lay on people. I want to explore and let people draw their own conclusions.
Okay, this question goes out to both of you again. And is there something that you would you would advise young writers and readers in India to do?
I'll go first because I'll go Heather, please.
Yeah, sure. Look, it depends what you want to write. I can only advise without qualification on writing a historical novel or writing anything that's based in history. It doesn't have to be about people. It can be about a place and a time and an event. Go looking for them because they're not going to find you. Okay, I was lucky. Lully found me and the sisters found me. But I have other stories which I've actually found through a little snippet in a local newspaper. Interesting people with interesting lives who are just ordinary people. They occasionally will have a story written about them in a local newspaper. Go back in history and look at the different kind of events that have happened and see if you can dig deeper and find a story in it. Yeah, one of the great examples I give is a screenplay that was written called Chinatown. Now, that was written because the screenwriter, William Goldman, read a little article in the Los Angeles newspaper about water shortage. And from that, this incredible story evolved. They're out there, folks. Just go looking. Or if you're like Graeme and you've got a brain and you can be creative, well, that's great. I don't have a creative brain. So I have to look for other stories.
That's wonderful advice. Graeme, over to you.
I just want to underline Heather's first because she said it twice in different ways, which is if you want to do research, go out and talk to people because you will get all sorts of subtleties and detail that you'll never get from going to normal research channels and so on. Go and talk to real people and humanize their stories. But for me, I'll keep it very simple. When people ask, say, I want to be a writer, I say, wonderful. Imagine you wanted to be a neurosurgeon. You have some idea of how much work that would involve. Well, that's the amount of work and effort you should be putting into becoming a writer because there are more jobs for neurosurgeons than there are for writers. So it's a discipline, it's a profession, treated as such.
Perfect. Do you have, and this is again to both of you, do you have any particular kind of a scheme you follow or a kind of timetable that you follow in your writing process?
Well, I'm going to hope my publishers aren't listening to this because no, I don't. I'm very non-disciplined at all. I tend to get to that point where, hey, can we have this draft in the next 2 weeks? And then I'll just work day and night, easily distracted. So I'm not a good person to be asking that. But I have to admit that once I do get into that writing process, because for me, what Graeme said is research. And I read somewhere that the way to tell a story, even one that you're creating, you still have to do some research in it, if it's meeting people, whatever. But research, research, research. Now throw the bloody research away and write. And that's how I take it. There's no paper, there's nothing in front of me when I'm writing. If it's not up here, then it's not going to get on the screen.
Wow. I also think that, all three of us present a particular facet of hope, because all of us did different things in our lives. And, much later in life did we decide to, the two of you took screenwriting courses, but eventually we all landed up in books. Could you tell us more about that journey, and what message of hope does that hold out for others?
Look, I would say practically, can I just sneak in a quick commercial here?
Yeah.
I'm the opposite to Heather. I'm very disciplined about the way I go about my writing. It comes from the sort of profession I've come from, I think. It's a carryover. So I've actually got a book coming out in March called The Novel Project, which is step-by-step discipline of writing a novel. These are the stages and so forth. But in answer to your question about screenwriting and so on, look, I would say if you want to tell an original story, write a book. Don't write a screenplay.
I just couldn't let go of this opportunity to pick, the brains of the most successful writers I have met. And, congrats. And yes, audience, please go ahead and buy these books, because Heather is brilliant in unearthing real history. And Don he's cerebral and hilarious, and that's a really unbeatable combination. So please do go out and buy these books, and hope we can get them to India next.
Yes.
With this, I am going to start with the question answer session, and these questions have come from the audience. So this is for both authors. Share with us some of the books you grew up with, which the younger generation must read. This comes from Zia Kudroli on Facebook.
I grew up in a small country, not even a town, just a rural area in New Zealand. You know what I read most as a kid? It was the Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't even know if you can get it anymore. Did not have access to libraries and the kind of novels and stories that you do now. But for me, I chose to escape in these incredible cultures and people through Encyclopedia Britannica. I devoured it. In terms of when I did finally get access to high school that had a library, I found myself gravitating towards actually biographies or autobiographies. Always been fascinated by real people. But now, hey, give me any good story written that's police procedural by Baldacci or Michael Crichton or Lee Child. Maybe not so much Lee Child anymore, seeing he's got a ghostwriter, and I didn't say that. But in terms of as a young child, yeah, I did not have the access that I then gave to my children and grandchildren. Encyclopedia Britannica.
And you, Graeme?
I didn't have access to Encyclopedia Britannica. We dreamed of having Encyclopedia Britannica, let me tell you. We had Junior Pear's Encyclopedia, which was given to me by a friend, and I must have read it over and over again. And I had a book called Exploring the Planets by Roy A. Gallant, and I could just about recite that book. In fact, I essentially gave Hudson, my young autistic child, that sort of behavior of sort of virtually memorizing a book of facts. But like Heather, I read a lot of non-fiction. When I graduated, in a sense, to fiction, I read a massive amount of science fiction, great stories, terrible characters. And the first book I read really seriously was The Plague by Albert Camus when I was 15. And that was a complete revelation to me that you could tell a really important story. It could still be accessible. It could tell you how to live, as it were. It could explore how to live without telling you, and still be a gripping yarn. So that was a formative book for me. 15 was when I started reading real books, as it were.
Funnily enough, Heather, my school had a copy of Encyclopedia Britannica, and I would miss lunch to read it because, you couldn't take that home, you couldn't whatever.
Yeah.
So I would miss lunch, or I would sit after school and just read and try to absorb everything. imagining that, that you only grew up and you only were learned if you knew everything that was in an encyclopedia. So yeah, we have commonalities there. Um, the next question that I have is from a reader called Nidhi, and this has come via YouTube. I'm not going to read her question, but her question is around Silka. So would you like to say something about her here?
Oh, absolutely. Silka, this young girl who suffered the dual evil, horrific periods of history of the Holocaust and the Siberian gulags in the Soviet Union. I told her story because Lali made me promise I would tell about the bravest person, and he would wag his finger and say, not the bravest girl, the bravest person I ever knew. She survived by being raped. There is no other word for what she endured for nearly 3 years in Auschwitz. To be then accused of collaborating with the enemy by the Russians when they liberated that camp and sent to Siberia for 10 years. Her survival there is, again, something that should be a story on its own. I was able to tell her story through Lali, through Geeta, who spoke about her in her show tape, meeting other survivors who knew her. Even Livy remembers her in the camp. And by going to Koshita and sitting down with the people who had known her for decades, her neighbors and friends, and to sit in the small apartment next to the one she had lived in for 50 years as people came in all day speaking a language I didn't understand. But I was hearing through their emotions about this beautiful woman who had survived these evil, horror, terrible times, but didn't let it define who she was. She still went on to have this incredible life, be a friend to everyone. So I'm very proud to tell Silka's story, even though I've got panned for it a little bit. It's worthy of telling. It's time that we stop pretending the sexual assault of women and girls did not take place during times of conflict and war. And when I read from the academics and historians that we don't talk about it because it's going to shame them, well, I just think it's our shame. It's not theirs. And it's time to, I know, who am I to speak out? Well, I've given myself that right. So please marvel at the survival of this incredible young girl.
And millions and millions and millions of writers are grateful to you for this. So, thank you so much for taking up these stories. My next question is to Graeme. This is from Julian on Instagram. Your trilogy suggests that there is much hope for people with autism to lead as normal lives as possible, provided they are surrounded by people with greater awareness of autism. Do you feel enough is being done to create such awareness?
Can you guess my answer?
No.
Yeah, no, there's never enough. But there's a lot being done, which is great. We are in a far better position, I think, than we were a few years ago with our attitudes to autism. Look, fundamentally, we're talking about difference versus disability or inferiority, and then we begin to touch on some of the issues that Heather had to deal with Nazi attitudes and so forth. Are we going to say that all humans are effectively of equal value? What does that really actually mean? There's a long journey that we have to go on. I mean, when people say, how would you feel if your child was, you ask them, how would you feel if your child was autistic? Well, I'd rather not. How would you feel if your child was gay? Or how would you feel? Well, I'd rather not, versus, well, they would be who they are, and perhaps that would be wonderful. And autism can make it hard to live in our existing society. I would love to see changes to make it easier. And it can also, some of the most huge contributors to our society are or have been autistic, whether that's been known or not. Elon Musk is out now as autistic. You look around at some of the drivers of technology and so forth, and you would see some signs of autism in that group too. These are huge contributors, and they shouldn't be valued only for that anyway. But let's say that that is part of it too.
What I'm most amazed by, in my conversation with the two of you, is that not only are you all artists and writers, but you are writers who are activists through their writing. And believe me, that passion shows in every line. Thank you so much for spending your Saturday evening with us, Graeme Simsion and Heather Morris. Guys, please go out and buy these books. You will be doing yourself the greatest favor in 2021. And with this, over to you, Gillian.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Graeme, Heather, and Nandita, for this heartwarmingly reassuring conversation, and to our audience for joining us today. This session was presented by KV Mariwala Philanthropy Initiative. The books discussed are available at our knowledge partner, landmarkxsite.com, that is landmarkxcite.com. Thanks to all our partners without whom none of this would have been possible. Tata Literature Live, co-sponsored by Tata Steel and Tata Projects and powered by Godrej, continues with many more conversations, workshops, and engagements. Do check out our website for the full schedule. Coming up at 4:15 p.m. IST is Book in Focus, Tata Literature Live's unofficial book club. This year, the book in focus is Kiran Nagarkar's Ravan and Eddie, which also happens to be my current read. And it's absolutely fantastic. It's a very interesting, fun, insightful book. So do log into that session at 4 p.m. IST.